Your frontline workers don't have time to take your training. And it's not because they don't care, it's because you have never built training that fits into their day. Here's the reality. Frontline teams are scheduled to the minute. There's no extra hour for a course, no quiet room to sit through a module. They walk in with their plan for the day, and guess what? 15 minutes, that plan is gone. Unfortunately, a lot of them live in very busy, chaotic work environments. But what do most L&D teams do? They use the same hammer they use on everything. They just build more courses. JD Dillon, an industry leader, has spent 10 years at Disney, 6 more at Kaplan, and the last decade building tools used by millions of frontline workers. His take is clear. The problem isn't just training. It's that we're still designing for a world that doesn't exist for them. This shift is from training people to enabling them, building help in the job itself. This isn't just a course on a shelf. It's support at the moment of need. In this episode, JD breaks down exactly what that looks like, why the longest chapter in his book has nothing to do with learning at all. Let's check it out. What's up, everybody? Erick Prospero here with the Microlearning Lab. Today, we're speaking to JD Dillon, specifically on learning in the flow of work. For me, I'm excited about this as a microlearning fanatic because a lot of learners or frontline employees don't necessarily have the luxury of stepping away from their roles for long courses or static content. And I know I'm very biased as to use microlearning as a form of media or as a feature or even as a strategy. And it's very useful in this context. But for our guest today, we have JD Dillon, and he has been in the forefront of this shift, helping organizations rethink how they enable their people, not just train them. His book, The Frontline Enablement Playbook, lays out a practical approach to embedding learning directly in the workflow itself. So JD, at a high level, could you tell us a little more about yourself?
I am an operator turned learning and development practitioner turned technologist, a writer, speaker, general person who tries to be helpful. So my entire career has been wrapped around supporting the frontline workforce. I started out managing movie theaters and theme parks before transitioning into learning and development during the 10 years that I spent with the Walt Disney Company. I spent about 6 years with Kaplan, the world's largest education company, supporting their contact center operations. And then the past 10 years in technology, building tools that are used by millions of frontline workers around the world. So I do my best to help organizations enable the people that do the heavy lifting for our organizations and communities every day.
So you're qualified to speak on the topic, and you're definitely qualified for the book. So we're excited to hear a little more about this. Now, you talk a lot about moving beyond traditional training. What's fundamentally broken about how organizations approach learning for frontline workers?
Time. If you ask any large group of people, what's the biggest factor, the biggest obstacle that informs the way that you support your frontline teams, the word that's going to start scrolling violently across the chat is time. Organizations prioritize labor management. They only schedule as many people and as many hours as they need to serve customers or deliver products and services. As a result, there's a very limited period of time, often very compliance heavy, that we can meaningfully focus on targeted development for people that are in frontline roles. And then after that, people are largely left to figure it out on their own or rely on the person next to them, rely on their manager. Traditional training just doesn't fit the realities of how frontline operations run. So rather than try to say, oh, things should be different, we should dedicate more hours and more budget to training frontline team members. We should make it a priority just like doing the job is every day, which I wish every organization would just stand up and say, this is important. This is what people deserve. I don't think that's the case. It's just not how businesses operate and what is prioritized. So I believe it's on people that are in training, learning and development, enablement roles to evolve the way that we think about what we do and find ways to fit tools, tactics, and technologies into the reality of how the job is done so that we can help people do their best work and feel proud and feel confident about the work that they do every day. So that's the difference between training and enabling people in the workplace.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I love the comment you made about it'd be great if everyone said yes, right? Let's do this. Let's make this let's shift our culture to make it more of a culture of learning and development. But the reality is, even if they say yes, it's more of a a theme of the month until priorities shift and they have to get back to work and production is expected.
I was just going to say, I think so many of the problems that come down to the experience of work overall, inclusive of frontline workers, are solvable problems. Do you want to solve your turnover problem? I can solve it. Do you want to solve performance-related issues? I can solve it. Do you want to solve compliance-related issues and risk-related issues, sales-related issues, safety-related issues? We can solve it. We know how. It's that clash between what it would take to do it right and the realities and priorities of businesses today, and we got to find the middle ground in between.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's always an instance of competing priorities, the now versus tomorrow, right? Investing in infrastructure, people. It's definitely a future-oriented task as opposed to servicing your customers today, right? That's a trade-off, and which, again, equally is important. They pay the bills. You have to jump on this priority. You have to make sure things are getting done. Now, I know a big topic of the book is learning in the flow of work. It gets thrown around a lot, but how do you define this, and what does this actually mean?
It is our third favorite buzzword. We have AI way up here, and then way down here, skills shows up, and then right after that, you have learning in the flow of work. I find the term actually falls short. I think commonly we talk about learning in the flow of work more about availability of resources, or can people get to things when and where the job is done. Not often enough do we rethink what are the things. What tools, tactics, and technologies are we applying as part of the job to help people do the job? So learning in the flow of work is not making courses available on a mobile device that people can now pull up when and where they do the job. It doesn't take into account a couple of key factors. One, do people have time? Doesn't matter if I can get to it. Do I have time to be able to take advantage of whatever that resource is? And is it the right thing that I need to solve whatever problem I'm facing in the flow of work? So for me, it's less about quote unquote learning in the flow of work. It's more about learning and development being part of the job, enablement, more importantly, being part of the job, and us understanding the realities of the day-to-day workflow so that we can figure out what's the right way to provide help. Because it's interesting, if you ask anyone in a corporate office, how does the frontline operation run? They are very likely to quote the SOP to you and say, this is how it's supposed to work. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Then you go visit any frontline operation. That is absolutely not what happens day to day. There is no perfect reality. There is no typical frontline day. You walk in with a plan and the plan is gone within 15 minutes because 5 closers called in, this customer's very upset, and half your building is now blacked out for reasons. So how do we understand what it's really like to do these jobs and then figure out what's the best way to help people be successful in doing those jobs? So for me, that's an evolution of the idea of learning in the flow of work, which I think comes from the right place. But I think we have to think more broadly, break outside the barriers of traditional learning and development solutions and really think about how is I doing my job to enable you to do the best version of your job?
How do you change the amount of influence L&D has in that space though, right? Because then you're dealing with operational tasks as opposed to, hey, here's this training that's available that we made for you.
In my experience, there's only one way to get people to think differently. It's to fix something. I have never been successful going into a senior management conversation with operations, stakeholders, subject matter experts, compliance, IT, whoever, that we need to help think differently, and pitching theory or strategy or ideas. Even if it sounds good on paper, and maybe a lot of it's common sense, right? The idea that people can't consume and retain large amounts of information in single settings, everyone gets that, right? It's common sense. People forget things. You don't remember everything that I've said so far in this conversation. People know that, but then we still sit retail associates in a back room for 6 to 8 hours on their first day to click next to continue violently to get through the content. They're not remembering any of that, but we're checking the box because that's what we have. So for me, instead of trying to pitch ideas or talk about what's the right thing to do, talk about employee experience or related metrics, talk about employee engagement or turnover, instead of any of those things, find a problem that is meaningful to the stakeholders that you need to be thinking differently. Might not be the biggest problem, but a meaningful problem, and fix it. And then do it again, and then do it again. And eventually people look up and start looking at you differently. Instead of thinking of you as the learning and development department, they think of you as those people that help me solve problems. And that unlocks trust. It changes the relationship, and it allows us to dig in harder to do what we ultimately want to do, is help people be successful so the organization is successful. But right now, a lot of people in L&D are trapped in a box. People think we do certain things because of the relationship they have with us and the relationship they have to education. Their entire experience of education is go to place, consume things, take tests, now you have learned. That has never been true. We can have a different conversation about academia in the future. But in the workplace, it's definitely not how learning and development should work, but that's what people have locked in their heads from a legacy perspective. We have to change the way that people think about what learning to do the job is and the role that we can play in helping make the organization successful. And I have found the most powerful unlock is finding the right stakeholder and solving the right problem and getting them to look up and realize, oh, you can do that. What else can you do to help me? And it starts to change the conversation, and then we can evolve our capability in that way.
Love the approach. I mean, that makes perfect sense. Typically L&D, so we work with a lot of associations developing training content, and they have the same issues, right? They're seen as a category, a catalog of content, right? Same issue with L&D for larger corporations, right? It's essentially a catalog of content as opposed to a solutions architect, right? Somebody who's actually there to solve a problem through a library, right? That we can have access to, or that we have to consume this content because of X, Y, Z. So that makes perfect sense. And the approach on solving a problem, it makes sense. How do you execute that in a tactical way? I mean, I know you have to understand that, as you know, L&D professionals are incredibly busy, right? They have a lot going on. They essentially production workhorses on content. So are you suggesting maybe shifting 5 hours a week to a specific problem to get that first win? Or I mean, is this more of an experimentation process where, okay, you validate an idea, then you come with actual results that move the needle, and then you present this and you ask for more time? What's your approach here on negotiating this?
I'll give you an example. In my contact center days, was kind of stuck in that place where I knew I could not build as much e-learning content as was being asked of me with my available resources. And I started to mature as a professional and figured out this isn't solving the problem. This isn't what I should be doing, but it is what I'm being asked and, for a better term, told to do. This is my job here. And I needed everyone involved, including my own department, as well as the people that we were supporting, to start thinking differently about what we could do to help people perform more effectively and to drive outcomes for the organization. But I couldn't just brute force that change, and I had a job to do, right? There was a project always going on and then another one right behind it. So step one was to get closer to the job itself and the workflow and start looking around and figuring out, where is there a gap inside of how the job is done that's achievable in terms of my ability to impact it? And how does it relate to a stakeholder or set of stakeholders that I need to start thinking differently to get on my side of the conversation that would then allow me to influence others more aggressively? And I found it. So in this contact center role, there was a lot of different documentation people had to reference regularly when they were on the phone with people. There was one particular list that was kind of the thing they went back to over and over and over again. It was maintained by the legal department. And I started to figure out people had different versions of that list, right? They had downloaded a PDF at one point and they were referring to whatever version they regularly opened. And it wasn't necessarily the most recent version. So I went to that particular member of the legal team and I said, "Hi, you don't know me. I'm the person who asked you to review every word that I ever publish because, right, legal, compliance and whatnot. Can you tell me about this? How do you maintain this list? How often do you update this list?" She said, "Oh, I update it like every week. We find new information to put on this list." I said, "Great. How often do you share the new version of the list with everybody else?" "Once a month." All right, so we already have an issue. It's updated weekly, but you put a new version out there once a month. How do you share it with people? Put it on SharePoint. Great. So people download it to the desktop. That's how they look at it. Yes, that's how they look at it. Okay. So it's just a broken process altogether, right? So I said, what if I could give you a way to digitize this process? So instead of you having to handle documents and there'd be different versions on shared drives and local computers and all this kind of stuff, I'm getting into this kind of knowledge sharing practice, which is the foundation of my future framework. So instead of pitching a framework, I said, I'm getting into this. I'm helping us be more efficient with the way that we move information around the organization. So what if I create a digital version of the list? I'll do it myself. I'll take the PDF, this monster PDF, break it into a series of digital assets that you can update in real time. I'll give you authoring permission. You can come in, change it whenever you want. And immediately when you change it, it's now changed to everybody else. And for the end user, for the employees, it's a searchable tool now. So instead of having to scroll a PDF or control F a PDF, they can just go into the search prompt, type what they're looking for, here it comes. Would that be good for you? She said, yeah, it feels like a good idea. Great. So again, this is entirely a side project, not a very big project, didn't take me very long. But I changed how this particular process worked, made it easier for a key stakeholder in the legal department to be able to do what she was doing, and then made it easier for the people who were doing the job every day to do what they were doing. So, had nothing to do with learning and development. It did relate to performance, but I was stepping in as a problem solver, not someone who's thinking about how to help you learn or develop skills or anything like that. And now suddenly, I had employees using a tool that I had built, and I had a member of the legal department looking at me as a problem solver that, what else can I help you do, right? And then in future conversations, guess which member of the legal team I brought with me when we needed to have any type of compliance-related conversation? It was that particular individual, because they understood we looked at issues differently. We understood what it means to solve problems. I'm not sitting here trying to be all about learning and development or training. I'm here to help the organization be successful. So that's an example of when you understand how the job is done and you can find the points of friction, smoothing out the right points of friction for the right people earns you the right to come back and say, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And suddenly you become a problem solver, not the learning function.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's so easy to say, oh, that's the process. So that's the way it is. Let's use our hammer that we always use to create another presentation on it, right? I think it's so easy for us to default to creating content. But it does take a little more bravery to actually go and try to change the process. Like what advice do you have for people in L&D? They might be a bit hesitant to do that or speak up because not everyone's going to be as bold or enthusiastic about that.
I have found the individuals who are the most difficult to change, the people whose mindsets are the most difficult to evolve in this conversation of evolving our practices, expanding beyond being the learning and development function, tend to be people in the learning and development function. Because so often, it's not just what we do every day. We wrap our identities around our roles and how we do what we do and the tools that we use and all of these different ideas. So if you're in an L&D function that you're looking to evolve, you're the manager of a function you're looking to drive forward, we have to start having difficult conversations amongst ourselves before we start to break out and work with stakeholders and subject matter experts differently. Because we all have to be on the same page, and we also have to acknowledge that it's not as simple as saying we're going to do things differently now. If you're a classroom-based trainer and you're suddenly evolving to a space where we're not going to do as much classroom-based training anymore, you're going to think about, how does that impact me? If you're a content developer and we're having an AI conversation, you're going to be thinking about, how does this impact me? So it's incumbent upon anyone who manages these functions to start having, if you're not already, these challenging conversations of being as transparent as possible in those conversations and pushing on decision makers to understand where are we going so we can properly be preparing, adapting our processes, adapting our tools so that we're helping support the change and enable the change, not being impacted by the change. And that's inevitable for every support function. So it's not just an L&D thing. We need to have hopefully been having this conversation for a year and a half at this point, not starting now. But if we haven't started to have this conversation, it begins internally, making sure we're all on the same page, understanding how functionally, role-wise, individually, we need to change so that we can provide value. That's the name of the game, is how are you helping the organization go forward and drive results? It's not about learning. That's not our job. It's not about knowledge and skill development. That's part of what we can do. We have to evolve out of that definition in order to be delivering the type of value and agility the organization is going to need moving forward.
That makes sense. So you're saying it's more of a shift from, or employees don't necessarily need more training, right? They need additional support, the problem solved. Now, what does that shift look like in practice?
So I think people need all of it. So
Okay.
I think it's important to acknowledge that nothing goes away in this evolution. So it's not like, because first of all, for some reason, the profession at some point decided the word training was bad. I've had arguments with people about the fact that the word training is somehow negative. I don't like the word learning. Why? Because we use the word learning oddly, in my opinion, because you don't make learning. Like learning's not an object that you create. It's a process that takes place within the individual. Training is a practice that we deploy and is very important in most workplaces, right? You don't learn how to weld by figuring it out with performance support tools. Like someone who's very skilled and a very good trainer shows you how to do it the right way, make sure that you're ready to go. And then you need some type of ongoing support to make sure that you're continuing to do it correctly. You're able to ask questions when you maybe run into a problem. You can pull resources when you need to. So it's more about going from a world where training is the default. It's the thing that we do. We build programs and courses for a living, to a world where we're fostering an ecosystem of enablement. L&D going from a place where content is our business to a world where connection is our business, where if I can find ways to connect people who know with people who need, and that solves the problem, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm not going to build anything unless I have to. But if there's a complex challenge, if there's something that requires, maybe it's because it's a regulatory topic and you just have to build training for it, or training is the right thing to do because it's a complex topic that requires that level of scaffolding and that level of support. I'm going to do that too. But I'm never just going to build training, because I fully believe that no person on planet Earth has ever gone back into an e-learning module that they completed 6 months ago to look up that one piece of information that they forgot. That is not a thing that has ever taken place on Earth. But I can deliver the training that is the right thing to do or the required thing to do. I can also make sure there's referenceable information available, or a digital assistant of some type where you can get questions or ask questions, raise your hand, get help. Make sure that you're getting practice opportunities to refine and retain that information that you learn so you're ready to apply it in the moment of need. So it's thinking more holistically about the kind of ecosystem of enablement that we can wrap around the employee so that you can get help, whatever that version of help is, when you need it to solve that particular challenge.
In the past, we would always use the excuse of either financial constraints, capacity constraints, or technology constraints, right? It's difficult to actually see or impact this because we don't have the tools. Now, with AI in the mix and a bunch of new tech coming out there, what's actually changing about this learning and development workflow and this practice of enablement?
What's interesting is I think that the most challenging obstacles are still there. Right? They're not mitigated by an evolution of technology. Let's take the frontline workforce as the example. Let's have all the conversations about AI you want. If there are no screens and no connectivity available in that workplace, it doesn't matter. If you're working on a construction site and no one has a mobile device, there are no screens for me to access you, and there's no internet connectivity, we're not having a technology conversation inside of that space. We're talking about traditional hands-on training, physical tools, physical guides, binders, right? We're still in that world. So it comes back to understanding the workflow, what tools are being used to do the job, what access points look like, and then what's the currently available set of tactics, tools, and technologies that I can deploy to try to help you do your job better. One simple example, let's say that we are in a frontline workplace where there are screens. So let's talk about a grocery store. A grocery store, you might be working as a cashier standing in front of point of sale. You might be working in the deli department behind a deli scale that has a giant touchscreen device. You might be working as click and collect. So you're fulfilling online orders and putting them in a position where people then come and pick them up. So you're carrying a mobile device in that case. And you might just be one of the 90+% of employees that are carrying a mobile device on you all the time because you have your personal smartphone in your pocket. So in that world, I can now look at all of those access points and say, how do I leverage all of this technology to help people do their jobs? Whether that be to learn the foundational skills required in their job, whether it be to help them answer questions or troubleshoot their way through a particular challenge. It just allows you to kind of unlock from a world where, learning at work means you have to go to a back room, sit at a desktop computer, and work through a series of slides, to a world where, I can think about every screen in this workplace and say, well, how do I use those devices to get you the help that you need, on top of all of the analog practices that are still going to be hugely valuable, because we still are going to rely on hands-on job training with a peer. We're still going to talk about managers who are inside that environment, providing feedback and coaching along the way. One of the most valuable learning and enablement tools I think that exists in the frontline workplace is the pre-shift huddle. I don't want that going away. Let's say that you have a mobile device on you all the time and I can just send messages straight to that mobile device. That's great. I still want the team to gather before the shift with the manager and have a conversation. But instead of the manager having to just read things at you, I got the following 13 emails from corporate. Let me tell you all the stuff. Now we can just send you that information. But now that conversation could be more about celebrating great work that was done, an example or a story that took place, or having a back and forth conversation about a challenge that we're facing in the store today. So we can use all of these different tactics. And I think technology enhances that overall ecosystem rather than replacing something. But it comes down to understanding the workflow, understanding what technology looks like on the job, and then crafting the ecosystem around that reality, which again is, I think, a unique part of the conversation when we talk about frontline enablement. Because when you're talking about enabling a corporate workforce, they are all sitting in front of computers all the time. You don't even have hardware conversations when you're thinking about L&D from that perspective. But as soon as you flip in the direction of the frontline workforce, you have to have that conversation first because it shapes everything else. Because I've still never run into a hotel housekeeper carrying a mobile device. They're still using clipboards and paper sheets in most cases to assign different rooms and things like that. So I have to fit inside of the reality of the workplace that includes technology.
I love that approach. Now, how does your book help leaders avoid tool-first thinking when it comes to tech?
So I attempted to tell in 680 pages and 3 pounds worth of content. So it's a thick story. But I attempted to tell, there's a reason the book is that long, because I attempted to tell a holistic story about the experience of frontline work. There are 3 chapters in this book that are dedicated to technology. So we talk about the reality of hardware and devices inside of the frontline space. There's a chapter about AI and the tangible impact that AI is having on frontline employees' ability to do their jobs effectively. There's a conversation about the consolidation of technology in the frontline space, because it's not about having a tool for this, a tool for that. It's about having one unified digital experience that people understand how it fits into the job. But that technology story has to fit into the broader story of understanding who are the frontline workers. The idea that frontline work is not one thing. Even inside of one particular business, if you take a telecommunications company as an example, you might have field workers who are out there installing cable in people's houses. You have contact center agents who are there when you have a problem and they pick up the phone. And you have retail associates who are inside stores selling you mobile phones and accessories. So even inside of one business, different categories of frontline workers do their jobs in meaningfully different ways. So I try to help people who are reading the book understand the realities of their frontline workforce, think differently about how they can evolve their tactics, and again, apply that kind of ecosystem mindset of it's not just about doing one thing or applying one platform or one set of tactics. It's about a broader set of tools that we can use that align with how the job is done every day. And then we go after a lot of the familiar challenges that you face when you're enabling frontline team members. So everything from compliance to onboarding to day-to-day job performance to how do you think differently about career development, kind of economic mobility, the future side of learning and enablement. And then I wrap up the story with the most important part by saying, well, how do you get buy-in? How do you get everyone else to think differently? Because you may come at this and say, it's not just about tools. It's not just about content anymore. It's about a bigger story of enabling work. But you still need everyone else in the organization, from the frontline workers themselves, managers being the most important people in the story, the frontline management layer, but then the executive team, decision makers, department heads. You need them all to agree that they're not just going to knock on your door and say, we need a course on, and that's just what we're going to keep doing. So we have to help the organization think differently. And it comes back to where we kind of started our conversation around that influence and helping expose people to a different version of how we can help people do their jobs. But so I tried to tell the overarching story. And the other really cool thing that happened in the creation of this book is I talked to a lot of people who do this job. So it's not just my opinion on how things work in my experience. I have 50 different collaborators who submitted content that are included in the story, and then several frontline employees themselves who tell you about what their experience is like, what their day-to-day life is like, and what helps them feel capable and confident in the job every day. So if you want to read a story about a flight attendant who had to physically take down a passenger on his first flight out of training, that's an interesting story. And I asked them, well, how'd you know what to do? Or if you want to hear about a woman who's working 3 frontline jobs just to get by, and that's what life is like for her and how we have to take those types of situations into account, we have that story as well. So a lot of powerful stories about the reality of frontline work, helping set the tone for, okay, where do we fit to help these people be successful every day?
I'm excited about it. I know this is a tough question because there's obviously a ton of resources. You've partnered with a lot of people to put this together, different stories. But if somebody reads your book and they implement one idea, or if they don't read your book and you want them to implement one idea to support them with this area, what should it be and what impact should they expect?
The longest chapter in this book has nothing to do with learning or training or knowledge sharing or technology. The longest chapter in the book is about community. It's about connection. It's about the idea that frontline workers don't work for your company. They work for their manager in their location, the person who hired them, trained them, pays them, schedules them, and knows their name. That's the company. Frontline employees don't work for the success of your quarterly goals or KPIs. They work for the success of the team to make one another successful in the job. The most impactful frontline teams that I've ever been part of or managed were groups of people that connected, that loved one another, that would do what it took for one another, and in doing so, drove the organization forward and hit their goals along the way. So I talk about how do you foster that level of community, especially at scale? Because you may work in a distribution network that has 50 different facilities. Guess how many cultures you have in your workplace? The answer is 50. So how do you not make the mistake that I think a lot of companies make and a lot of HR teams make, assuming that culture is something that you can push down, that you can make a decision at corporate about what it's like to work here and how our values and mission come to life every day? You can't. You can decide and set the tone for what those values are, but how they're brought to life takes place inside of the environment every day. It's led by the location manager or the shift manager or the person who's responsible for the work, and it's brought to life by the team members who do the job every day. So we talk about the connection between performance and community and how you can set the tone for community from the very first day and then continue on. Because when you talk to frontline employees, and there's a lot of factors that come into why people do this job. People have a variety of their own motivations for working in frontline jobs. In a lot of cases, they need a paycheck because they're trying to take care of somebody, which is awesome. But when you talk to a lot of frontline employees and you ask the question, not why do frontline employees leave, why do you stay? You tend to hear one thing over and over and over again. Yes, I could make $1 an hour more down the street, but I like the people I work with here. I trust this manager, they take care of me. So how do we foster those connections? Because in high turnover environments where people, they don't necessarily quit 6 months in. Some people quit on the first day when this isn't matching what they thought this job was going to be, and they have another option, sometimes across the street. How do you keep people and how do you motivate them to perform? It's about connection and building those relationships and building that trust so that when you go to work, you're not just hitting your goals, you also might be having fun at the same time. So if you're going to focus in any one area, in addition to helping managers be successful, The longest chapter in the book and the place we dig in the hardest is really that connection between community and job performance. And I think it's a part of the story people don't talk about a lot, especially in learning and development.
It's huge. It's never brought up. It's never a conversation that's had, right? At least from the teams that I've worked with, it's a lot more structured and formulaic. So I love the approach. And again, this call has been incredibly insightful and helpful. I definitely want to learn more. What's the best way for people to, one, find the book, learn more about you, your organization, and hear about what you're doing?
So a couple of places you can visit. First, the book website is frontlineplaybook.com for the Frontline Enablement Playbook. Anyone who read my first book, The Modern Learning Ecosystem, you might know the website for this book is jdwroteabook.com. So yes, my new book is also available at jdwroteanotherbook.com. But frontlineplaybook.com. If you want to learn more about what I'm up to, any different activities, educational experiences, just projects that I'm working on, you can go to jddillon.com. And I also urge everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find as JD Dillon. But everything I'm up to there, having tons of conversations, sharing a lot of information about the people behind the playbooks, the people I collaborated with right now. So great opportunities to connect to a lot of people around the world who are equally passionate about frontline workers. And of course, if there's anything that I can do, if you're looking to drive meaningful performance from your frontline teams, reduce turnover, improve that sense of community and culture, please reach out. So at jddillon.com, you can find me, and I'm happy to help out.
Perfect. I'm just taking a note here to purchase JD wrote his third book.com for the future.
I already own JD wrote a third book.com.
Okay. Beat me too. I knew you would have too. I was like, hey, I'm pretty sure you did this.
Not an expensive URL.
No, I would imagine a couple of bucks on one of these platforms. But JD, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it. Incredibly valuable. And we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Want to learn more about microlearning best practices? We've got you covered. Check out the video cards for more related content. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly tips and explore the description for a curated list of resources to continue your e-learning journey.